please, can you just convince him to let me go? She said, I'll do anything, just let me go. And she even offered oral sex. I had her give me oral sex. She gave me oral sex. I fixed myself, I fixed my clothes. I put her back like I found her and went back into the living room and sat down.
They say terror is born in the darkness. What if that darkness shows just how fragile safety really is? On January 6, 2007, a young couple in Knoxville, Tennessee, vanished without a trace. Hours later, what investigators uncovered would be among the most disturbing crime scenes this region has ever seen. He would walk in agony. She would scream until her lungs gave out. Their end would shock a city and spark a scandal that would stretch years beyond that winter night. I'm your host for True Crime Watch H, and today we unravel the chilling story of Channon Christian and Chris Newsom, a story of love interrupted, savage cruelty, and a justice system pushed to its limits. If you haven't already, take a moment now to subscribe and ring the bell. You don't want to miss the twisted turns ahead, and we want you with us every step of the way. Let's begin. Let's go back to that night. Channon Gail Christian was 21, a sociology major at the University of Tennessee with her whole life ahead. Chris Newsom was 23, a carpenter by trade, full of hope and plans. They'd had dinner and intended to go to a friend's party, simple plans for a Saturday night. Shortly after 8 p.m., as they stood by Channon's SUV in a parking lot, something dreadful began to unfold. Witnesses reported seeing a group of men watching them. In a swift, chilling moment, masked gunmen forced their way in, tied their hands behind their backs and dragged them away. The vehicle, Channon's 4Runner, was driven off. The couple became hostages in a nightmare that would stretch over 48 hours. At first, their disappearance was treated like any missing persons case. But few hours later, the evidence would force investigators and the public to confront something far more sinister. By late that night, neighbors near a house at 2316 Chipman Street noticed lights blazing, unusual activity at an otherwise quiet home. Someone driving past slowed, as if sizing up what was happening. One local resident later testified to hearing gunshots in the direction of nearby railroad tracks around 1:45 a.m. Meanwhile, Channon's vehicle was discovered days later, abandoned, not far from the scene of the abduction. But by then, several critical items were missing: her teddy bear, photographs, electronics. The interior was disturbed, mud on the floorboard, and removed window stickers. Investigators found a bizarre clue: fingerprints on an envelope inside the car. The prints matched a man named Lemericus Davidson, just 2 blocks away. That discovery set in motion a chain reaction. Police swarmed 2316 Chipman Street on January 9, only to find the house empty. But inside, horrifyingly, they discovered Channon's body stashed in a trash can in the kitchen. 5 plastic bags held her battered, tortured frame. Her face was covered with a small trash bag, her body bound in a fetal position. At almost the same time, authorities were led to railroad tracks not far from town. There, they found Chris Newsom's badly burned body, partially wrapped in a comforter. His hands had been bound, his clothes removed from the waist down. Barefoot, he had walked across snow and mud. The cause of death: multiple gunshot wounds, including one executed at point-blank range to the brain stem. By now, the horror was clear, but not yet fully understood. What had started as a flashing gun and a stolen car would reveal moments of incomprehensible torture, terror stretched across hours, and perpetrators who would lie, betray, and fight for their own survival. The crime scene itself offered grotesque stories. Autopsy reports would later reveal that Channon had endured repeated sexual assaults, brutal, sustained attacks far beyond what many could imagine. The state's acting medical examiner later testified that she had been object-raped during captivity, that bleach had been poured down her throat and over her body in an attempt to destroy DNA evidence. Davidson's and Cobbins. DNA was found on her clothing and in her body cavities. Chris's body, too, held anguished proof. Evidence suggested he was raped as well, sodomized with a blunt object, before being forced to walk barefoot to his execution point. Some evidence of DNA was destroyed in the burning. Shell casings recovered at the Chipman Street house matched those used in the murder of Newsom. The question on everyone's mind: who would do this and why? Investigators quickly turned to Davidson. His fingerprints were already in the system. He lived at the very address connected to the crime scene. But Davidson would not confess easily. He offered multiple stories. One claimed he left the house that night and had no part in the crime. Another claimed his brother had brought the victims to him. Another said Channon whispered, "I don't want to die." He denied sexual contact with Channon. Meanwhile, investigators were drawing in a cast of co-conspirators. Letelvis Rome Cobbins, half-brother to Davidson, George Thomas, Eric Boyd, and Vanessa Coleman. Each would later claim differing levels of involvement. Cobbins and Thomas faced aggressive prosecution. Coleman was accused of facilitating the crimes. Boyd was initially charged federally for the carjacking. One key breakthrough: an item found at the crime scene, a mangled dog leash, was used to suggest how Newsom had been forced to walk to his death. A comforter and other wrapping items on his body linked the house to the railroad tracks. And inside Davidson's home, police found Channon's purse, camera, torn photographs, shoes, and even Newsom's driver's license and baseball caps, all bearing Davidson's prints. The evidence was mounting, but the suspects were ready. Legal maneuvers began almost immediately. Judges would be challenged. Retrials would be demanded. Appeals would shake faith in key verdicts. But for now, the city waited, horrified and demanding answers. When police stormed 2316 Chipman Street on January 9, 2007, the smell of chemicals hit them first. It was faint bleach, mixed with decay, the kind of scent that clings to the air and to memory. Inside that small Knoxville house, detectives found what would later be described as a crime scene out of a nightmare. Furniture overturned, blood traces scrubbed with cleaner, women's clothing scattered across the floor. In the kitchen stood a black trash bin, sealed shut. Inside was Channon Christian. Her body told the story, her voice never got to finish. The medical examiner later testified that she was still alive when placed in that bin, wrapped in 5 layers of plastic bags, tied so tightly she couldn't expand her lungs. Death came slowly from suffocation. And though investigators had seen many horrors, none of them forgot that image. Forensics cataloged every inch of the property. They found Channon's iPod, purse, shoes, and Chris Newsom's driver's license. Shell casings matched the same caliber weapon used at the railway tracks. But the real proof lay in what couldn't be cleaned: DNA. Bleach had faded the stains, but not erased them. Swabs from the bedroom walls, the mattress, and Channon's clothing returned profiles of Lemericus Davidson and Letelvis Cobbins. It was irrefutable. When investigators traced the comforter used to wrap Chris's body back to that same house, the circle closed. Within 72 hours, the manhunt began. Davidson went on the run. He hid in a vacant house on Reynolds Street, living off fast food his friend Eric Boyd delivered. But phones always tell the truth. Cell tower data showed constant calls between the two men after the murders. When police confronted Boyd, he cracked just enough, claiming he only helped a friend who was in trouble. That tip led officers straight to Davidson's hiding place. He was arrested still wearing Chris Newsom's Nike shoes, a McDonald's bag beside him, and a .22 revolver under a cushion. Minutes later, his half-brother Cobbins and friend George Thomas were caught in Lebanon, Kentucky. Vanessa Coleman, Cobbins' girlfriend, was found not far away. 5 suspects, 1 house, 2 victims, and a mountain of evidence waiting to speak. Every interview began the same way, with lies. Davidson first claimed he had no idea who the victims were. Then that his brother brought them to the house. Then that he'd only borrowed Channon's SUV to sell drugs. When detectives confronted him with the DNA report, he smirked and said, "That's impossible." But bleach doesn't wash away guilt. Cobbin's story shifted too. He said he barely knew the victims, that he just heard screaming. Yet in his own words, recorded later, he admitted that his brother did something crazy. Vanessa Coleman's interview was the most chilling. When asked what she did while the victims were being attacked, she shrugged and said, "I was in another room, but I heard it." Detectives would later find her journal, written the day after Channon's death. In it, she described the ordeal as one hell of an adventure. Those words sealed her fate. Between 2008 and 2009, Knoxville's courthouse turned into a fortress. Each defendant would face a separate trial, and each one exposed more horror than the last. The first trial was for Ledelvis Cobbins, who tried to shift all blame to Davidson. He portrayed himself as a bystander who couldn't stop what happened. But DNA evidence placed him at the center of the assaults. The jury deliberated only a few hours before finding him guilty on all major counts: kidnapping, rape, and murder. His sentence, life without parole. Next came Lemericus Davidson, the man prosecutors called the ringleader. His defense claimed there was no proof he fired the fatal shots, that he was a small-time drug dealer, not a killer. But the evidence told a different story. When prosecutors showed photos of Chris's burned remains and matched bullets to Davidson's revolver, jurors wept. He was convicted and sentenced to death. Then came George Thomas. His lawyers argued he was too afraid to stop the others. But prosecutors painted him as an active participant, the one who helped restrain Channon. He too received life without parole. Finally, Vanessa Coleman took the stand. She cried, claiming she was held hostage, that she wanted to leave. But the journal entry destroyed that narrative. Prosecutors read her words aloud. "Last night was one of a kind. I had one hell of an adventure." The courtroom fell silent. She was convicted of facilitation of murder and kidnapping, sentenced to 35 years. Eric Boyd was the last. At the time, there wasn't enough proof to link him directly to the murders, so he faced federal carjacking charges instead and received 18 years. But the story didn't end there. Just when the families thought the nightmare was over, another one began. In 2011, it came to light that the presiding judge, Richard Baumgartner, had been using prescription drugs throughout the trials, and even buying them from a defendant's relative. His addiction invalidated the proceedings. The Tennessee Supreme Court ordered retrials for all 4 main defendants. Imagine that, after reliving every gruesome detail for years, the families were told to do it again. 8 trials in total. Each time the same evidence, the same photos, the same heartbreak. Viewers, if you were a juror hearing this twice, would you have the strength to face it again? Let me know what you think in the comments, because for Channon and Chris's parents, it was a test of pure endurance. Despite the chaos, every new jury reached the same conclusion: guilty. Davidson's death sentence stood. Cobbins and Thomas kept their life terms. Coleman's sentence was reaffirmed. And in 2019, Eric Boyd was finally indicted by a state grand jury, this time for murder. He was found guilty and given 2 life sentences plus 90 years. Justice delayed but not denied. Through every trial, the Christians and the Newsoms sat front row, day after day, staring at the people who took everything from them. They refused to look away. Gary Christian, Channon's father, became a symbol of grief and grit in Tennessee. He said, "If the system won't protect us, we'll make it better." And they did. In 2014, Tennessee passed the Chris Newsom Act and the Channon Christian Act, reforms designed to tighten oversight of judges and accelerate appeals in death penalty cases. Their tragedy sparked change across the state. Dina Christian founded a scholarship program in her daughter's memory for sociology students who want to serve their communities, the same dream Channon once held. The Newsoms, meanwhile, built a youth baseball charity. Chris's number, 14, is still worn by players across Knoxville. Even after the cameras left, the families kept showing up to parole hearings, to memorials, to candlelight vigils, so no one would forget. Their courage became the one good thing to grow out of something unimaginably dark. As details leaked, the internet ignited. Some websites twisted the facts for political agendas, spreading fabricated claims of mutilation and racial motivation. The families begged for it to stop. This case wasn't about race, it was about evil, choice, and cruelty. But controversy sold headlines, and rumor replaced empathy. Even now, 2 decades later, many people still stumble across the case online and ask, how could human beings do this? There is no satisfying answer. What happened at Chipman Street defies reason. Time doesn't heal everything. Sometimes it only sharpens the edges of memory. For the families of Channon Christian and Chris Newsom, the years after the verdicts weren't filled with peace, only with the heavy, echoing weight of what justice could never fix. The killers sat in prison cells. The trials were done. Yet every birthday, every holiday, every quiet evening in Knoxville was a reminder of 2 lives that should still have been living ordinary days. But this story didn't end in that courtroom. It lingered in letters, in appeals, in the hearts of those who refused to forget. When the retrials concluded, Tennessee's Attorney General called the case a scar that never closed. Every time a new motion landed on a judge's desk, it forced the parents to relive the night their children vanished. Defense attorneys filed appeal after appeal, arguing technical errors, jury bias, even claiming the media's coverage made a fair trial impossible. Most were dismissed, but each one reopened wounds that never really healed. Still, Gary Christian and Hugh Newsom showed up to every hearing. They didn't want revenge, they wanted accountability. In interviews, Gary often said, "I promised Channon that we'd finish what she started, and that means seeing this through, no matter how long it takes." Their resilience turned them into advocates. They learned court procedure, lobbied lawmakers, and spoke to victims, rights groups across the country. What had begun as personal tragedy slowly became a public mission. In 2009, a letter surfaced from Lemericus Davidson, written inside Tennessee's Riverbend Maximum Security Institution. It wasn't addressed to the families. It was sent to an acquaintance, but somehow made its way into public evidence. In the letter, Davidson wrote, "I don't lose sleep over it. People die every day. I just got caught." He claimed he was set up and said, "The media turned me into the devil." Those words broke something in the families that court sentences never could. There was no remorse, no apology, only arrogance. When reporters read the letter aloud, Channon's mother turned away, unable to finish listening. Hugh Newsom, Chris's father, said simply, "He's exactly what he calls himself, a devil, and devils don't feel sorry." It reminded the public that monsters don't always hide behind masks. Sometimes they write their own confessions in ink. The Christian Newsom murders exposed cracks in Tennessee's justice system, cracks wide enough for families to fall through. The Channon Christian Act required random drug testing for judges after Baumgartner's scandal. It also created emergency replacement protocols so that misconduct could never derail multiple murder trials again. The Chris Newsom Act tackled sentencing delays, limiting how long death row appeals could stall before reaching the state Supreme Court. Before this reform, families could wait decades for progress. Together, those laws became symbols, proof that even out of horror, reform could be born. While the nation debated justice, Knoxville quietly changed. Residents still talk about the night the city lost its innocence. It wasn't just another crime, it was an assault on everyone's sense of safety. Channon Christian described how she couldn't drive past the intersection of Cherry Street without feeling her hands shake. Gary Christian, once a contractor who loved working outdoors, said he avoided even mild winter nights because the cold reminded him of what his daughter endured. The Newsoms found comfort in baseball. Every summer, their foundation hosts a youth tournament in Chris's name. His old teammates coach there, and before the first pitch, a moment of silence fills the field. Then the sound of a bat striking a ball breaks the quiet. For a brief second, it feels like Chris is still alive in the echo. Over the years, the story attracted sensational headlines and internet speculation. Some sites twisted facts, others invented new ones entirely. The families pleaded with the public, "Don't turn our kids into clickbait." Even now, every few months, a false rumor resurfaces online, exaggerated details, made-up motives, or claims of hidden conspiracies. But beneath all that noise remains one undeniable truth. 2 innocent people lost their lives because a group of adults decided their pain was entertainment. As one Knoxville detective later said, "Evil doesn't always have a grand reason. Sometimes it's just cruelty for its own sake." By 2017, 10 years had passed. A memorial service at the University of Tennessee drew hundreds. Students who hadn't even been in kindergarten in 2007 stood alongside old friends of the victims. A pastor read from the book of Romans, "Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good." Gary Christian held up a small silver necklace that once belonged to Channon and said, "This is all I have left that doesn't fade, so I'll wear it until I see her again." The crowd stood in silence, many wiping tears they didn't expect to shed. For a moment, the case felt less like a headline and more like what it truly was, the loss of 2 young souls who deserved an ordinary life. In 2019, 12 years after the murders, the long-avoided 5th suspect, Eric Boyd, finally faced state murder charges. Prosecutors used new witness statements and phone records to prove he was present during the abduction and that he helped transport both victims. After 3 hours of deliberation, the jury found him guilty of felony murder, kidnapping, and rape. He received 2 life sentences plus 90 years. For the families, it was the end of a 12-year nightmare. Gary Christian said, "Now every one of them has heard that word guilty. That's all we ever wanted." But there's no real victory in a case like this. Only a final page turned in a book no parent should ever have to read. Today, the house at 2316 Chipman Street no longer exists. It was demolished in 2008, reduced to rubble, then grass. Locals say flowers still grow there each spring, though no one plants them. Every January, friends gather at the site to light candles. They bring photos, baseballs, handwritten notes. Some pray, others just stand quietly. The story has been retold in documentaries, podcasts, and classrooms studying criminal psychology. Professors use it to show how group dynamics can turn opportunity into atrocity, how ordinary people in the wrong company commit acts that defy reason. But above all, it stands as a warning. Monsters rarely look like monsters at first. When you strip away the courtroom drama, the police reports, and the headlines, what's left is heartbreak. 2 young people who loved deeply, laughed easily, and never got the chance to grow old. Chris Newsom once said to his mother, "I finally found someone who makes life worth slowing down for." Channon told a friend that she'd never been happier. Those words became their legacy, reminders that love, even when stolen, leaves a mark that cruelty can't erase. If you've watched this far, you're part of keeping their memory alive. Their story isn't just about loss. It's about what communities do after tragedy, how people demand better laws, safer streets, and accountability from systems meant to protect them. So here's my question for you. If you lost someone you loved in such a senseless way, what would justice look like to you? Would it be punishment, prevention, or remembrance? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I truly want to hear what you think. And if this story moved you, please like this video and subscribe to True Crime Watch HD for more real stories told with respect for the victims, not the criminals. Because stories like this remind us of one haunting truth: evil can walk down any street at any time, but so can courage. And tonight, as long as their names are still spoken, Channon Christian and Chris Newsom have not been forgotten.